So for those of you that are joining, welcome to another hackajob LinkedIn Live. We've got into a good rhythm of doing these now. We're probably doing them every fortnight or so. The last one we had an awesome employer brand session with some really top speakers, so worth going back on the hackajob LinkedIn page and checking that out. Today we have got, I would argue, Sam, the most insightful 20 minutes of everybody's week is what we're aiming for today. So it's going to be a little bit shorter and a little bit punchier than maybe some of the sessions that we ran previously over the last couple of months. But maybe, Sam, as people are joining, you can kind of tee up why are we here today. For those of you that don't know, maybe just a quick intro about your role at hackajob and what you've been cooking up with the team that's getting released today.
Yeah, so we're releasing a white paper on not just like a topical topic right now, it is the subject, right, which is AI. Everywhere you go, every piece of content, every talk, every newspaper article, everything in some way, shape or form either has a connection to AI, has been generated by AI, or is supported by AI. And underneath that world in which we're operating right now is obviously the talent that's powering these transformations across organizations, and teams of 10 people, 20 people are turning businesses into 100 million ARR businesses in 11 months. Teams of 5 to 10 people inside of enterprises are shifting markets by trillions of dollars in matters of hours. So, more paramount than ever to kind of get in touch, understand how to engage with the audience. And when we did the survey, maybe 5 months ago or so now, there were some real standout themes. And actually what we've done is just gone and revisited that. We were going to go more thematically across all the areas of tech, but it's clear that this is the area right now that is so important for us to cover in greater depth. And it's got such a nuance to it in terms of hiring versus just hiring other individuals in tech.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. And it's interesting that we've gone and revisited the topic of AI and AI talent and AI skills only 5 months later. I mean, just this week, Anthropic have released their latest software engineer copilot, and it's just changed everything again. A couple of weeks ago, it was DeepSeek. So I think the funnest thing about this space right now is the pace of change. And 5 months really is like 5 years, in the difference. Yeah, very excited to be releasing our latest report today. Drop a note in the comments. We'll give you a little exclusive, a little early access before it becomes publicly available later on. We're just going to talk through some of those kind of key findings from surveying what we believe is to be the largest AI talent pool in the world. We're not aware of any talent pool that is larger than the hackajob community when it comes to these types of skills. So Sam, we promised the listeners, the viewers, 20 minutes of insight. Let's get into topic one.
Yeah, it's just like headlines.
Let's do this, the news bulletin. So I think let's just start with what's changed in the last 5 years. Like what from the reports that we've done previously, the reports over the last 5 months, what are we seeing is changed over those last 5 years?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a bit like the other areas of tech. It's gone from broad roles where you might just have somebody who's an ML engineer into like a myriad of specialist positions across the organization and specialisms within that kind of broader job title of ML engineer. It's also gone from this is the next blockchain or Internet of Things or quantum computing. It's like the hype cycle of a lot of big technological shifts is also kind of maybe inaccurately forecasting a bigger growth or a bigger impact than you'd expect. Whereas this is like the reality is not even matching, the hype doesn't even match the reality, right? And the hype is pretty loud. It's a pretty loud echo chamber. And I think the early forecasts in terms of revenue impact, in terms of like business impact and focus was like, yeah, this is coming. It's another area of technology that we should be aware of, etc. To now like the cornerstone of what organizations are thinking for their future. And that's not just enterprise, that's across the board. I think the other piece, which is really exciting, what we're seeing more and more roles go live from is startups. And startups went through this wonderful stage. There was loads of funding. It was easy to get capital. There were companies, sprouting up all over. And then there was a real decline, like a savage decline almost overnight. And now we're starting to see that pick up. And touched on it at the start, you're also getting companies that are reaching significant revenue numbers faster than ever. with smaller teams than ever. So yeah, I think those are some of the like bigger shifts since when we looked at this a while back to when we look at it now.
Yeah, a big shout out to the team over at Cursor. I know all of our engineers are obsessed with Cursor, and I think it came out 2 weeks ago that they're the fastest startup ever to reach to 100 million of ARR with effectively a PLG motion, which is super, super interesting. I was just having lunch with one of our big financial services clients, and I think it's awesome to see the UK startup scene back thriving. There is no doubt it was a really tough couple of years for startups more broadly. It does feel a little bit frothy. I saw somebody's raising $1 billion rounds at a $7 billion valuation today without a product. So let's see. Maybe some of the hype won't match the reality. But yeah, it's definitely awesome to see that energy back in the startup scene. And it's going to be fascinating to see, does this trend of smaller teams actually persist or will companies end up being much larger? Let's deep dive into what we do best, Sam, which is understanding the talent. That's really what we've spent the last 10 years doing at hackajob, is obsessing over technical people and how they think about the world of work. And when you look at people that are either working in some of these AI startups or the specific AI roles, what are some of the differences that we're seeing maybe against a classic software engineer or classic cloud engineer?
Yeah, so I think the first bit came from the platform data. So you've got 900,000 plus candidates that are feeding real-time data on tens of thousands of jobs and interview processes, providing the reasons why they do and don't want to work for companies. And I think the piece that stood out the most 5 months ago when we did the report is still the same now, which is the role is much more important than the company, is much more important than the industry. It's like, I want to go in and engage with big sets of data. I want to transform the way in which a category operates or an industry operates or a society operates versus, I'm looking for a permanent position where I'm one of many inside an organization that's making incremental optimization changes. So I think that freedom, that kind of R&D style setup is just so much more attractive. And a lot of the folk who are asking for that tend to be that kind of top 1 to 5% of talent that frankly can command a different experience to different candidates because the supply and demand is so stark in terms of where that setup is. So I think that's certainly one of the first themes. And then when we went deeper, so we went and asked 500 actively interviewing AI engineers from top organizations in a much more detailed survey of what they want. Again, it kind of confirmed that wider platform data of what the expectations were, but then went a little bit deeper. And when we're thinking about how you engage with that talent, hiring managers, CEOs, it was we want to be engaged by the leader of the business. We want to hear the vision of what they're going to do, and we want to know what kind of project I'm going to be working on. And actually, project is that key word because it's not just about this long tenured cycle. It's about going in, building something, creating that proof of concept, and then maybe deciding to stay there afterwards, or maybe moving on and transforming something else. So yeah, I think that kind of fractional, temporary, being able to impact multiple different businesses just at a far, far higher rate than the wider platform, wider developers, another kind of key theme.
It's fascinating. It kind of reminds me of the London startup scene 10 years ago. Now, I mean, one of the things that's evolved at hackajob in that time is we're a much more global business than what we were kind of 10 years ago. And, 10 years ago, we were just London. And it was a very nascent, startup scene 10 years ago in London. And at that point, what you might describe as the 10x engineer or the top 1% of talent, what were the things they were obsessed about? What am I working on and who am I working with? And, I think anytime there was a moment where the demand for a skill is far outweighing the supply of that skill that's available, actually people do suddenly get a lot more picky. And, why would somebody go perm? Well, because they may be optimizing for job security. Why does somebody want to go and, go and maybe do a short-term impact? Well, because I want to go and have an impact. Actually test to what we started with. The rate of change is so quick. Well, actually, maybe I'll go in for somewhere of 6 months and then realize, what, this isn't the space I want to bet on, and go and bet somewhere else instead.
Yeah, and the flip side is then on the employers front, right? We're talking about the increasing number of startups. Well, within the increasing number of startups, they necessarily can't pay a permanent salary for an individual across the course of 12 months, 24 months, 3 years for a project. They want to be a lot more focused and pointed. Then when we think about the areas that we speak less about from a kind of recruitment perspective, but the applications of AI across medical, across sciences, a lot of time that's going to be a funded project that has a life cycle to it anyway. So they need to be able to attach the right individuals to those projects, and bring them across. And then within enterprise, how can you take this segment of talent, this way of working, and detach it from the internal governments, from all of the bureaucracy and red tape that you might have to work through when you're looking at the central data sets and when you're kind of going through the revisions, etc. Like, how can you create an environment to test a concept, to test a product, and then think about rolling it out more broadly? And then the individual may want to stay, beyond that, because they're kind of, enamored by the mission. And again, it's that supply versus demand. You are able to command a different experience when you're kind of hot property in the market, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, so on the talent side, we went broad and got kind of a general consensus. We've then gone really deep with 500 AI engineers that are interviewing for opportunities right now. And what we're hearing is project is everything. Like, you have to lean on, like, where are you going to go and make an impact? What data sets do I going to play with? What users am I going to go and be able to impact from day one? Hiring manager outreach, like, who are the people that I'm working with? Like, there is this Twitter sensation right now of the cracked engineer. I saw a startup that are putting out $50,000 referral fees if you're able to refer them a cracked AI engineer.
The link into the chat. I'm sure some people will be after that referral.
But that's interesting, right? Doing, a lot more with less, and leveraging tools like Cursor, Claude, whatever it may be. For those of you that don't know Sam, I'm sure a lot of you do, he is basically an internet sensation in our industry. Sam's job is to take the biggest talent problems and turn them into solutions for our customers. So Sam, put your employer hat on here. What tactically are you speaking to customers about right now? What tactically are you working with CEOs, CTOs, heads of talent on, so that they can go and actually win this talent and go and hire those cracked engineers that people need?
Well, I think you've laid the ground too heavily for me there, and set it up. But look, I think tracking back a little bit, I think first and foremost, it's again thinking about the tone, thinking about the message. This is a job ad. This is not a job description, and ultimately, that's not where people are going to find you either in this segment. The data was so clear in terms of where candidates in this segment are going to find their next role, and it was not coming to your career site and reaching out to you. It was definitely flipping the script the other way around. So how can you be proactive with your messaging? How can you leverage and lean into that project based outreach, and how can you get them speaking to the people they're going to be working with as quickly as possible and lean into the data sets you're going to be working with? The other thing, which is unsurprising, is hybrid work still dominates in terms of expectation from candidates. Remote, not so much in this area, which is interesting. There is a desire to be on site with things and to be in rooms collaborating with people, but also still having that flexibility of work. Such a few roles are 100% on site in the UK, the US, India, from what we looked at, kind of across platform data. So flexibility, which again, it sounds like oversimplified, but it really is like so important. And then flexibility in the terms of the contract, the length of the contract, where you're going to employ somebody, how frequently they need to be in the office, and then pulling on those strings of what's next. I think it's then part of it is going to be that future view piece of what the team structure is going to be like. So I think you've got the bedrock to start with, because people often talk about AI transformation, ML transformation, etc. If you're going through that phase, then you need the data maturity, you need the cloud maturity, like you need the infrastructure in place to enable that to start. But then beyond that, what are the skills? And I hate these types of phrases, but like the skills of tomorrow. What are those categories that are going to emerge from the types of people they're going to need in and around them? Because if you're bringing in an absolute A player that's going to be probably one of the biggest revenue drivers in your organization, what's the support structures around them? How can you think about that planning and setup? This isn't just a role, this is a project, a vision, and alongside that is the structure, the data, the architecture, the programming languages, the tech stack, opportunity for growth. So appreciate there's a lot there of like jumping things between, but there's a lot to think about as well.
No, there definitely is. And everyone should download the report. It's completely free, and all of that goes into in a lot more detail. And maybe it's worth talking to kind of the approach to hiring that we've seen from companies in this space, and how it's maybe shifted from having a very predefined role of like, this is exactly what I need, to actually maybe firstly starting with the talent and being like, okay, that person's got this select skills and knowledge, and they can come in and solve my problems and the challenges that I see right now. Maybe a not talked about shift in kind of the actual hiring of a lot of these kind of skills and roles right now.
Yeah, or identify an opportunity that you haven't even thought of yet. And frankly, there's such a small segment of people globally that are truly at the bleeding edge of AI and machine learning that it's not possible for your boardroom to have thought about the opportunities for these problems. It's not possible for those teams to think about like the problems, the challenges which you might encounter. But I think what is really apparent is you can see as like major disruptors are entering into each industry segment that the rest of that industry segment are paying very, very close attention to what's happening, within those brands.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe speak to, how we're thinking about it from a product perspective. We made a big announcement last week with the AI Collective, which I think is taking a very different approach to mirror what we're seeing from talent. I think one thing we've always been great at is understanding the talent side of the marketplace and providing an environment where they really trust and have a great experience. But I do think the hiring challenges are slightly different. So maybe talk to what's going live on Monday with the AI Collective and why, you've been a key player in driving that internally, why you think that's going to respond to some of the challenges and give employers some of the tactics that you've talked to today.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's candidate first. So you might not even have these roles open, but it's about if I can attract this caliber of individual into the organization, just a 1 hour telephone conversation is going to be enlightening, let alone, a 2 month, 3 month, 4 month engagement where they're able to come in, analyze, understand the business, create some solutions, create opportunity, create revenue ultimately, and keep people competitive. I think it speaks to what we've heard on the employer's side, particularly from like emerging startups and high growth scale ups, of not being able to commit to a permanent work base, but actually needing to bring in the caliber of talent to move things forwards. And then on the candidate side, the data just spoke for itself. It was just unbelievably clear that this very specific segment of engineers were not responding in the same way as they would do as other engineers on the platform. And therefore, we needed to cater for that candidate experience in a different way. We needed to cater for their journey in a different way in terms of what their expectations were and how they wanted to be connected with. As much as we'll have recruiters on the AI Collective platform, there will be more space and increasing focus on hiring managers being part of that journey right from the very inception, even if that initial sourcing and screening of candidates in the view is going to be completed by recruiters in part. Yeah, we're leveling up the amount of impact and input of hiring leaders just to match candidate expectations.
Yeah, love it. And if you are a company hiring for any AI talent, any AI-based roles, definitely go and check it out. There's still are spots available to join, which goes live on Monday. Okay, Sam, we promised them 20 minutes. We're at 19:25, but we did start a weather report. So I think we got 2 or 3 minutes left. Let's look into the future. Let's do classic crystal ball gazing and get some hilarious predictions on the record, which will inevitably be wrong. When you're looking into the future, don't worry, I'll give some too. I'm saying mine will just as likely to be wrong. That's the fun part about predicting the future. When you kind of look into the future and you see what's coming in this space, what are your best guesses? What are your best predictions, over the next, let's define it to the next 6 months, 12 months, the rest of 2025?
Well, I mean, 6 weeks is long enough, I think, in what's going on in the world of AI. I'd probably flip the script slightly and think about things which might stop the pace of change or slow the pace of change, because it has been monumental so far. I think the first one is energy, right? It is a considerably greater strain on energy resources, and it requires a lot more energy impact in order to drive the outcomes. So if that infrastructure can't be built at the same pace that AI is moving, I think that's going to be one part. I think the second part is going to be legislation. We've got something very similar to ISO that is forming, the 4001571, plus a bunch of other compliance pieces, which I think are going to have their challenges in terms of data transfer, in terms of processing, that could ultimately slow things down. But to try and predict where it's going to go, difficult. I think the one thing which we touched on in the paper is the areas where we expect talent to grow. those kind of like data annotator roles, which most people aren't going to be familiar with, but is a huge burgeoning industry. And there's kind of 10 others, and we're leveraging, academia, we're leveraging like external sources as well as our own internal data to try and give some predictions there. But again, it's if there's ever a difficult time to predict, it's now. I think it would be easier to predict whether Man United beat Ipswich tonight, and that is too hard to call.
That's a strong no. I heard this brilliant interview with Jeff Bezos maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, which was kind of a contrarian answer to this question. And he said, rather than thinking about what's going to change over a 6, 12, 24-month period, which bluntly, he was like, we've got some very smart people at Amazon. We don't know. Actually, what are the things that are going to stay the same? And, for Amazon, he was like, consumers are always going to want convenience, cheaper, and a higher distribution of goods. Like, that's it. And so actually, when you apply that to listening today, yes, so much is going to change. There's going to be a lot of new roles out there. There's got to be new skills coming in. What are the things that stay consistent? Really smart people want to work on really interesting projects that will make an impact. And they want to know who they're going to be making an impact with. And I think leaning into those things, those led on, Sam, I think is a record in any circumstance, more so than how much demand we're seeing in at the moment. Sam, any parting gifts for the audience? Any parting wisdom before we wrap up?
I think I'm not sure on parting wisdom, but massive cop out from yourself when we said we were going to do some predictions and you were going to give some too, and then you just gave Jeff Bezos.
Okay, fine.
So fine. Come on, hit us.
Fine. I'll do a prediction then. I'll do a prediction then. So there's a lot of talk around software engineers becoming obsolete. 5 years ago, if you had an 18-year-old ask you, what should I learn to get a good job? You'd say, go to a coding boot camp and go and get a job. Still disagree with the idea that software engineers are going to become obsolete. I think that AI agents are definitely going to play a massive factor. I think Zucker said at Meta that they think by the middle of this year, back end of this year, they're going to have an AI agent that can code as good as a senior engineer. Some great early reviews on Claude's new product. But I think, as so often when a massive change comes, ends up creating a lot more demand for the skills themselves. So as AI gets cheaper, energy is a great call out from you on how we're going to solve that problem. Maybe nuclear is going to come back in a big way. As AI becomes cheaper and more accessible, actually the demand for these applications go up, and therefore the demand to build these applications are going to go up. So will smaller teams do more? Yes, I think that's probably true. But this idea that this is like the death of the software engineer, I strongly disagree with. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next, that's a 5-year bet. But yeah, that would be my take. So I won't just quote Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, and I think that death of a software engineer is a bit like death of a CV. I believe it when I see it, and also it just creates this greater competition for features, richness, platform experience across products so far from what I've seen, rather than like reducing anything. It's actually just enabling people to do more, which is making people more competitive, which is driving organizations to roll things out faster than before. We do have a question from Pamela. Which 3 organizations are currently leading in the recruitment of AI talent? And I've asked it, Mark, so you now have to give an answer.
I have to give an answer. I would be fascinated. Look, who's going to just be hiring the most in volume is going to be the hyperscalers and the frontier labs. That's not a controversial or contrarian take. So, any one of the Metas is interesting to see what Amazon's strategy is going to evolve in this space. Do they end up looking at acquiring Anthropic? Obviously, major investors in Anthropic. Obviously, Google or Alphabet, NVIDIA, all the hyperscalers, and then obviously the frontier labs, the OpenAIs, the XAIs, etc. That's a given. I'm really interested in the startups that are raising $50 million, $100 million, but are looking to bring in like 5, 10 people, and actually do a lot with really small teams. That is if I was like, potentially as an internal recruiter looking somewhere interesting or a candidate looking somewhere interesting, that's probably would be my bias right now. I think it's going to be interesting to see how defensible these businesses are. Does the software we end up building go to zero in value because it's so easy to build your own software? We've seen that internally with some of the stuff that we've done at hackajob. But yeah, I'm really interested in how a lot of these startups that are raising punchy rounds actually deploy that. And is it just a cracked software engineering team of 10 that go on and scale it? Actually, do they go bigger? So obviously the frontier labs, obviously the hyperscalers, But those kind of earlier stage startups would be my ones to keep an eye on.
There we go. Look at that. Nice bombshell to finish. There's some words of wisdom. And thank you for the questions as we go through. That was a news bulletin closing out. And we'll be sharing the white paper with everybody who joined and everybody who signed up to this. We'll also be releasing it more broadly later on this week. So definitely check that out. Last call out from us. If you want to apply for the AI Collective and you want to engage with the top 1% of talent in the way in which they want to be engaged with, then we'll be sharing those details out as well. Free to apply, and then we will go through the process from there. Mark, have I missed anything, or should we close the show here?
Let's close the show there, Mr. Berthoud. Thank you as always for your wisdom, and yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. The Hackajob News Bulletin is now over. Cheers all.